The clink of a fork against china stopped me in the middle of a sentence. My mother tapped her wine glass with the back of a spoon, an old habit she used to call the room to attention, and the room folded inward like a drawn curtain. Candlelight made the silverware look like small, deliberate promises. Lily laughed from the head of the table, her voice bright and practiced, and across from her, Ryan kept his smile soft, hands doing the polite work of folding a napkin. I felt, for the first time all evening, like an extra chair set at someone else's rehearsal. If you're going to stay until the end of this, please subscribe and hit the bell. I've got more stories like this, and I'd love to connect. If this resonates, drop where you're watching from in the comments. It helps more than you know. We had come back to my parents' house for Thanksgiving because Ethan's parents lived 3 states away, and we both needed something that tasted like memory. Their house smelled like rosemary and lemon and the particular kind of homemade smoke that only seems to exist when someone is carving the turkey. I had spent the morning in the small upstairs bathroom tying the back of my dress and trying not to think about the fat envelope that should have been on the mantel with the others. Our wedding invitation, the one we had addressed and mailed 3 months before. We had done everything in order. We'd printed the invitations on a rainy afternoon in May, sat at our kitchen table in Seattle with a playlist of songs that felt older than us, signed the inside with a felt tip pen, and mailed them with addresses written in my own cramped hand. Ethan had taken photos of the batch stacked and stamped because I kept worrying something would go wrong. He joked that I had a wedding paranoia app he didn't know about. I laughed and saved the photos to my cloud. We checked tracking numbers after the mail carrier scanned them, the little digital receipts blinking green on our phones. Delivered, delivered, delivered. I believed the green. So when all the RSVPs that mattered, the ones from my childhood neighborhood, the ones I wanted in my life, never arrived, I blamed the snail pace of life. I blamed the move. Seattle had been oxygen for both of us, a place we had cultivated into a life small and sturdy. I blamed the way time slipped through adults' hands. People are busy. Email gets lost. Stamps peel off. Lives rearrange. I told myself the absence was not an absence of love, just a messy logistics problem. It unfurled differently. Ethan was the one who noticed the pattern first. He was quiet in the way of someone who watches for seams. He asked for the tracking emails and the delivery receipts, and then he asked for something else. An absurd question for a spouse to ask with that calm, certain tone. Do you want me to print them out and bring them to dinner? I said no at first. He kept asking. His insistence felt like a small, bright rope. I didn't want to make a scene at Thanksgiving. I didn't want the carved turkey to sit in the middle of a long, awkward silence. That, more than anything, is why I kept my mouth closed when the room applauded Lily for a promotion she had gotten at a boutique PR firm. I clapped. I folded my napkin with my hands working slow. My pulse thudded inside my throat like a small, embarrassed animal. When the coffee was poured and the pumpkin pie came around, steam and spice, the easy conciliations of holidays, my father cleared his throat and told a story he had told every Thanksgiving since I could remember, about losing his keys outside a supermarket and finding his way back to laughter. It calmed the table. My mother squeezed my hand under the table, as if to say she still counted me. There was a noise at the kitchen door, small, polite, and Ethan stood, walked back into the kitchen with folded sheets of paper in his hand. "Kat," he said, quietly when he returned, "do you mind if I show something?" My throat went dry. I nodded without looking up because at that point my hands were folded too tightly for my fingers to move. He set the pages on the table between the salt and pepper and the dish of cranberry sauce. The top sheet caught the candlelight. I could see the faint reflection of the flame in the glossy ink of the header. They were the USPS delivery confirmations, tracking numbers, barcodes, timestamps. Under the delivered notation were signatures, script, familiar loops. Lily's name was on 3 of them. The way the room sipped its breath out was almost a physical thing. For a moment, the silence had weight. It settled on my shoulders like a coat, heavy, warm, and suffocating. My mother's hand on my knee tightened, as if she wanted to anchor something she hadn't understood. Lily's smile didn't falter. She tilted her head, as if to examine the paper, as if the looped name might dissolve like sugar on the tongue. "You can't be serious," she said, voice even. "Are those?" My father's fork clattered against china. My mother, always the curator of moments, laughed too loudly, a sound that had edges. "Well," she said, and for a second I thought the laugh might carry us away from the cliff that had opened under the table. "Of course they were delivered. It's impossible not to receive mail. The postman always leaves things on the step." Ethan's jaw tightened. "These show signatures," he said. "Look, there are names. Someone signed for them." Lily's mouth moved like someone working to form a script. "If you mailed them 3 months ago, why are you bringing this up now?" Her eyes found mine with a look that was both casual and brutal. "Did you expect everyone to rearrange their lives for, what was it again, a small backyard thing?" There it was, the minimization that had always been the undercurrent of everything involving me and Lily. She could turn absence into flattery of her own needs, her own schedule. She had always been the one who took the wing and left the rest of us to rearrange ourselves under it. I remember the way the taste of coffee turned metallic against my teeth. I remember the way my hands became ice, how the candlelight seemed suddenly to throw sharp shadows across the table. My mouth knew what to say, and then couldn't find the sentence. I remember thinking of the envelopes in our apartment in Seattle, the ones on our entryway table the morning we left, the little heavy thing of them, a paperweight of hope. "I tracked them," I said. My voice was small but precise, like a well-aimed stone. "I have the receipts. Here." I pushed forward the stack Ethan had brought, the finality of paper between polished silver and carved turkey. My mother's face rearranged itself into concern, then something like confusion. "Well, She looked at Lily, then at the papers, then at me. "Why would Lily sign for your invitations?" For a second, the room teetered on some other axis, as if the gravity of the moment might pull in a different direction. Lily's fingers were steady on her wineglass. Ryan's hands had folded in his lap so tightly his knuckles paled. My father looked older in that fraction of a second, like a photograph left in the sun. It is easier to be brave in numbers, I realized then. It is easier to make a move when you are not the only one who has seen the evidence. Ethan's sister-in-law, Helen, reached over and took my hand under the table without ceremony. "We saw the tracking with Kat," she said quietly. "We thought maybe she'd misplaced them. We're so sorry." My mother cut her off. "Oh, Kat, that's ridiculous." Her voice felt like someone who had rehearsed puzzled disbelief for exactly this sort of moment. "Are you suggesting that Lily would—" She stopped, the question fading into a softness of denial. "That's a terrible thing to say." The table contracted. There were a few small noises, a chair scraped, the clink of spoons. I had, up until then, been working on patience like a practiced skill, counting out my responses in the quiet places of my mind. But the evidence did not care for my practiced patience. The receipts were real. The signatures were real. Lily's name was there, in her exact slanted hand, because she had been with my parents enough to make her script match the curving way our family wrote names down. "Why would she sign for them?" I asked, and I didn't feel like I was asking anymore, exactly. I felt like I was setting a fact down on the table, a clean, hard fact that needed no pleading. Lily's smile thinned. "Maybe they were delivered to the wrong house," she offered, lightly. "Sometimes the carrier drops things off to the neighbor. You know how confused the route gets around here." Ethan's hand came to rest on my knee under the table, grounding me. He whispered, where no one else could hear, "We have delivery timestamps, Kat. We have signature names. We have a neighbor who remembers 2 boxes at her door that afternoon." He had that way of breaking things down into smaller truths until they were manageable. I remember that I wanted to scream, to make sound heavy enough to roll the sky back into place. Instead, I unfolded my hands and set them on the table, palms down, and I looked at my mother. "Did you ever get an invitation?" I asked. Her smile was something made of habit. "We thought we would be invited when the plans were more definite," she said. Her voice ebbed into something like shock. "It's not the same doing it around here, Kat. We've always done things differently." I wanted to tell her that the difference between doing things and being seen was not a matter of taste, but of presence. I wanted to tell her that an invitation is, at its most honest, an act of acknowledgement. But instead, I inhaled and felt the air like something that might tip either way. That is when my mother said the sentence that stopped time for me in a way I couldn't have anticipated. She folded her hands and looked at Lily with an expression like a trophy being admired. "Oh, she looked so beautiful," my mother said. And then, as if the words were something to be admired in themselves, she looked across the table at me and said, "She really pulled everything together. If only she'd written to us sooner, we would have been there for her big day." I had been braced for denial, for face-saving, for anger. I had not been prepared for the casual way my life could be turned into an accessory in someone else's story. The way my absence could be folded into praise for Lily, as if my wedding were not an event I had built with my own hands. Speechless is a small word for the hollow that opened inside my chest. I felt my breath stop, then run like frightened water. Ethan squeezed my hand. I could see my father look away, a minute of that raw, helpless thing men sometimes do when they are not sure which way to put their hands. Ryan's face was gone from the polite smile. His jaw worked. Lily's expression was something like regret mixed with calculation. My mother, satisfied with her appraisal of Lily's performance as daughter, looked puzzled by my silence. "You're quiet," she said, kindly, as if to offer a remedy. "Are you all right?" I was not all right. I was a ledger with a missing column. The receipts were evidence, yes, but what they uncovered was a long habit, things that looked like affection, but were actually curation. A mother arranging her children on a shelf like collectibles, a sister whose charisma functioned as a gate and a sieve for the rest of us. The small exclusions that had marked my life, missing birthday calls, photos not hung in frames, plate settings passed over at gatherings, coalesced in that moment into an architecture I could name. I stood up. My chair scraped loud enough to be a punctuation mark. "I thought about staying quiet," I said. My voice came out steady. "I thought maybe it would fix itself. But you signed for our invitations. You kept them. My name didn't leave your house because of a postal error or a routing mistake. It leaves because someone decided not to hand it over." The room was a collection of breaths. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a bird trapped. My father looked at the tablecloth as if the pattern might contain the answer. Lily's face hardened. "That's not fair," Lily said. "You don't know what you're talking about." "You intercepted our mail," I said. "That's what you did." "No, I didn't," she said. Her denial was quick and practiced, the kind of reflex born from a life spent never needing to be wrong. Ryan looked between us, distressed, which only confirmed the old pattern. People always chose the comfortable narrative that allowed them to keep a polished image. My father finally spoke, small and ragged. "Maybe I saw an envelope," he said. "I found one in the back of the closet when I was looking for boxes. I thought it was an old thing, and I put it back." He looked like a man trying to remember how to be brave. "That would explain one," I said, "but not all of them." Ethan put a single receipt in front of Lily, the one with her full name and the timestamp. The ink gleamed. There was nowhere to hide the truth on paper. For a second, no one moved. Then Lily's face fridged into something like collapse. "I signed because I thought," she began, and then she stopped. The sentence collapsed under the weight of its implication. "I thought you wouldn't mind," she finished lamely, the admission a small, ugly thing. "You thought?" My voice was small and sharpened. "You thought it was your decision to make?" My mother covered her mouth with her hand at that, as if to muffle the transmission between her and reality. She had been the one to curate Lily's milestones for years. She had applauded Lily's choices, photographed them, framed them. The idea that her curation could be exclusion dressed as care was too inconvenient to confront all at once. When I left the table, I did not make a scene. I picked up my coat from the back of a chair like someone retrieving a familiar object. The house smelled of turkey and evergreen and the particular old wood that remembers arguments. I remembered the door. The threshold seemed wider than it had any right to be. It was a clean line between two territories. One where my history had been edited without my consent, and another where the world might be reassembled with hands that loved me. I could feel the heat against my face when I stepped outside, the cold like an honest instrument. Ethan came behind me after a moment. He was quiet, the kind of quiet that is not absent, but attention. Helen and Robert had followed us with 2 casserole dishes wrapped in foil, expressions that were soft and sure. Their warmth fit against me like a sleeve. They handed me a thermos of tea and an old blanket, and their presence had nothing performative about it. Robert grinned in the bright way of people who are on your side by default. He wrapped an arm around Ethan's shoulder like a seal. "We'll come by tomorrow," Helen said. "No speeches, just us. You can breathe there." My father came to the top step and hesitated. He looked at me in a way that had so many small apologies folded into it. "I'm sorry, Kat," he said, and his voice was small. "I didn't know. I should have." "It's not your fault," I told him. It was true, and it was not. He had been present enough to let patterns persist. He had been absent enough to make apologies necessary. He was, in his way, not a villain, but a man who had been taught how to keep the peace at the expense of his daughter's presence. My mother did not come to the door. She watched me through the window instead, as if she were separating herself into an image and a person. That absence was an answer. We packed a small overnight bag in the car later that night, a practical ritual of departure. Ethan's hands were efficient as he folded shirts and slid them into a duffel. I remember the ordinariness of it. Toothbrush in a small case, a paperback novel I would never open, the throw blanket Helen had pressed on my lap. We drove across town to where Helen and Robert lived, to a kitchen that already smelled of gravy and the low hum of an oven left warm. They fed me pie with a fork like a salve. Robert told a stupid, long story about a fishing trip he had failed at decades ago, and by the end of it, I was laughing, real laughter, a small sound that came from somewhere that hadn't been able to speak for a while. There was no curation there, no artful photograph to be taken. There was only a willingness to show up, to hold space. The next week, my father mailed an invitation he had found folded in a coat pocket. The envelope reached our Seattle apartment like an admission and an offering both. He called once afterwards, an awkward, fumbling conversation that tried to translate guilt into action. "I'm sorry," he said, again and again, like a scratched record. He promised to come if we wanted him to, or to understand if we didn't. He wanted to fix what he could. My mother never called. She texted a short message after a month, an emoji, a bouquet, and then silence again. I had expected many things from her reaction. This quiet omission was not entirely a surprise. It felt like the final seal on a pattern I had known for years but had been unwilling to name. People asked me, in the months that followed, whether I forgave them all. Forgiveness is not a switch I can flip. It's a weather system. It changes and shifts. I did, however, choose. I chose not to make the wound into a permanent geography of my life. I chose to stop expecting certain people to rearrange themselves the way I needed. That is the shape boundaries take. Not a wall, but a deliberate, steady step away. We had a small ceremony in Seattle. It rained the way Seattle does in late October, soft, tenacious. Ethan laughed at the flowers and my mother's absence by making fun of his own family's obsession with tartan ties. Helen embroidered a napkin for us with tiny daisies, a private thing that made me cry later when I folded it into a drawer. Robert shook my hand like a man making a compact. They came to the ceremony, and afterward we sat on their porch with white paper cups and hot cider and the taste of safety. I kept the receipts from that Thanksgiving in a drawer for a while, not as fuel for revenge, but as an archive of the moment the truth revealed itself. Paper has a cold honesty to it that memory sometimes lacks. It reminded me that when someone takes your mail, they do more than intercept paper. They interrupt your place in the story you were writing with your life. Calling that control by its name was an antiseptic act. It let me step into a new arrangement. People ask what made me finally speak up in that dining room. The answer is simple and also far from it. Ethan's quiet insistence that the truth be seen, Helen's small acts of solidarity, the ache inside me that refused to rest, and perhaps most of all, the knowledge that my wedding, like any ritual of love, deserved witnesses who came because they wanted to be present. In the years since, I have learned that family is not a ledger of shared blood, but a collection of small acts. The drive to a hospital at 2 a.m, the single phone call when you need it, the casserole that shows up unbidden. My mother's comment about Lily's wedding, that aside and applause, left me speechless, not because it stunned me into silence, but because it forced a clarity. Some people will admire your life from a distance. Others will live in it. Family is who shows up. After that winter, the shape of our life altered in small, steady increments. It did not rearrange overnight into a blueprint of happily ever after. Intimacy, like weather, arrives in patterns and slow fronts. There were repetitions that comforted me. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market, Ethan carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee while I squinted at winter greens, Helen's texts in the middle of the day, nothing urgent, a picture of a stray cat she'd bribed with tuna, Robert's laugh on the phone, the same story retold with new conveniences. These were the parts of family that grew elastic and useful. They could bridge distance. They could, if necessary, bear weight. My father adjusted around us the way a man learns to move in a smaller, older house. He learned our hours, the sound Lily made when she bumped her head, and the exact way Ethan hummed when he washed dishes. He joined us for the rare, uncurated dinners that followed hospital visits or bad report cards. He came not as a penitent seeking absolution, but as someone learning a new grammar of presence, the quiet driving across town, the hand on a shoulder that did not go looking for forgiveness. For a while, I catalogued his attempts with the same pragmatic affection I once held for receipts, evidence that something had happened, but the ledger softened over time. His visits, flawed and uneven, became part of our narrative. My mother's gestures remained occasional, like punctuation marks that did not belong to the sentence, an emoji, a bouquet image, an awkward comment at some other relative's wedding, enough to remind me she existed, not enough to change the story. I kept thinking of what else she might have been, what tenderness would have looked like if she had been generous with it. But those imaginings are private work. They do not compel the living. Instead, I focused on building the domestic architecture of steadiness, a pantry stocked with staples, a calendar that people could read, a recipe for soup that Helen wrote out and mailed to me on a rainy April afternoon because she believed in the consolations of food. There were harder lessons. You learn in parenting and in living that attendance is not identical to care. There were evenings when my father sat on our living room floor and watched Lily assemble a toy with a concentration that made his face soften, and other evenings when his phone call came late and distracted, apologies trailing off into the static of disinterest. I held both realities without needing to make them reconcile. That was perhaps the most important boundary I learned to draw, the ability to hold love and disappointment in the same hand, to let one inform but not consume the other. Work took a new shape, too. I accepted fewer assignments that required me to be away at night. The world had already taught me which absences could be mendable and which could not. Writing became, for a time, less about perfection and more about witness, about keeping a record that did not demand everyone's imprimatur. I wrote emails to friends who were grieving and realized how much easier it was to be the one bearing light for others when I had a small domestic hearth to return to. Attendance is contagious. You show up for someone once, and often you show up again. That is how communities expand. Once, in late spring, a neighbor's husband had a stroke. The first frantic day, we were a cluster of hands. Helen driving over with a casserole, Ethan sitting in the emergency room like an anchor, Robert phoning the neighbor's sister to coordinate visits. I found myself simply there, boiling water for tea, holding the neighbor's bag while she spoke to doctors, sitting silenced in the waiting room with a magazine I did not read. Those hours did not require explanation. They required proximity. They demanded the simplest form of grace, the refusal to leave someone alone to their fear. The steady practice of showing up reshaped how I thought about ritual. Weddings, funerals, hospital vigils, these are clear moments when the world insists witnesses are needed. But smaller rituals gained weight over time. Sunday dinners became ritualized not because we made them solemn, but because they were consistent. Helen's embroidered napkin, folded into the drawer, acquired company. A birthday card from Ethan's father with a joke inside, a Polaroid of the three of us in front of a too small Christmas tree, a crayon drawing Lily made and taped to the refrigerator with a star-shaped magnet. The drawer was not a saint's reliquary. It was a ledger of care. I sometimes opened it when I needed proof that I was not alone. People will sometimes ask whether I forgave my mother for her silence. Forgiveness, I tell them, is not a verdict. It is a practice you revisit until it feels less like an act and more like a geography you can traverse without getting lost. In my case, forgiveness assumed many forms: a verbal letting go, the decision to stop expecting apologies as currency, the willingness to accept whatever small kindnesses she might offer without demanding grand gestures. Some of those kindnesses came slowly and in forms that surprised me. A postcard sent from somewhere that sounded like a vacation I would not have chosen for her, a short email wishing Lily a happy birthday, a card that said something awkward and private. They did not heal everything. They did not need to. They suggested a possibility that even people who disappoint can offer something, however scarce. Time, which is the oddest of companions, brought its own reckonings. A former friend moved away and called less. An old mentor died and left a blank space at the center of some evenings. But these absences reframed the ones I chose to keep. Presence started to look deliberate rather than incidental. I learned to calibrate invitations, to ask for help, and to accept the help that came in shapes I recognized. I learned to decline with civility and to show up without calculation. There is a dignity in showing up because someone else asked, but there is also a deeper grace in showing up without being asked. Lily learned too. She began to hold her own small rituals, a particular bedtime story read in a tone that suggested some secret, a way of pressing her forehead against mine and calling me Mama, in a voice that had, for all its simplicity, the weight of a newly jurisprudential law. She watched how people behaved, like evidence. When my father knelt on the floor and let her braid his thinning hair, she smiled in a way that suggested she registered when someone was trying. When my mother sent a postcard with a crooked-lipped son, Lily studied it and turned it over, then placed it in the drawer beside the napkin without comment. Children are better at integrating contradictions than adults give them credit for. They see patterns without needing to sort motives. There were moments when I still felt the old sharpness, sudden and uninvited. A sentence in a book that mapped onto an old hurt. A holiday advertisement that trafficked in the ideal of perfect family. A casual remark from a relative that revealed how comfortable they were with the old hierarchies. Those moments required small cleanings of the heart. A walk with Ethan, a call to Helen, a night when I read aloud to Lily until both of us were sleepy and content. The work was not dramatic. It was the repetition of ordinary consolations until the pain had less purchase. Years, as they do, reframed intentions. My father grew quieter in ways that felt like compromise. He began to balk at long drives, preferring shorter visits, more frequent and less ceremonious. He brought with him a small tin of mints one evening and a paperback he thought I might enjoy. We read parts of it aloud on the porch while Lily chased fireflies, and for a little while the world narrowed into the clear, clean pleasure of being together. It was enough. It was often more than enough. I do not romanticize these arrangements. Chosen family can feel like scaffolding, useful, temporary, subject to weather. People move away, jobs change, illnesses arrive. But the deliberate practice of showing up teaches a kind of resilience that is not brittle. It is flexible, it yields and reforms. There is a nourishment in knowing which people will answer the phone at 2 in the morning, which hands will bring casseroles without making a spectacle of it, which voices will laugh with you at something small and private. Sometimes, on a clear evening in late summer, we sit on the porch with mismatched chairs and a cooler between us and tell stories that do not seek audience or approval. We retell foolish youthful mistakes that now redeem into fondness. We speak the names of those who are absent without obligation. Helen shows me a photograph on her phone, Robert with a ridiculous hat, and we laugh until Lily pretends to call in an urgent news report because she is bored. Afterward, when dishes are cleared and the porch lights are dimmed, I fold the embroidered napkin carefully and slide it into the drawer. It is a small act of safekeeping. If there is a single thing I would offer to anyone learning the geometry of modern family, it is this: show up, even when showing up is imperfect. It will not fix everything. It will not always be reciprocated. But the practice of presence writes a language that others can learn to read. It becomes, in time, the script our children imitate, the archive our friends consult when they are lost. Once or twice, in quiet and human ways, it calls into being a new kind of belonging. On mornings when the light slants through the blinds just so, and Lily is still asleep, Ethan will make coffee and set a cup beside mine without announcing it. He will touch my knee, briefly, casually, and in that small, unperformative way, he shows up every day. It is, perhaps, the thing I have come to rely on most, the small, unremarked continuities that stitch together a life. Those are the witnesses who do not need to be invited to testify. They already are. Outside, the city moves with its usual indifferent grace. Inside, the drawer is full of modest proofs: a napkin, a postcard, a Polaroid, a folded receipt that once marked the moment I learned the shape of a wound. I keep them not as trophies, but as reminders that our story is not dictated by the loudest claimants. It is written, in the end, by those who sit with you when the lights go out and who, in the morning, bring the coffee without being asked.